Oh, you want to hear about the great diplomatic incident of 2387, the one that almost started 3 wars but instead ended up with the most embarrassing peace treaty signing in galactic history? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because this is a story about how 2 fuzzy alien toddlers managed to accomplish what decades of negotiations couldn't. And yes, before you ask, it involved a human doing something absolutely ridiculous that somehow worked perfectly. Because of course it did. Let me set the scene for you. The Corvani Empire had been having what they called a minor territorial disagreement with the Terran Federation for about 6 months. Now, when I say minor, I mean the kind of minor disagreement that involves orbital bombardments and the systematic destruction of 3 agricultural colonies. You know, typical Tuesday stuff in this corner of the galaxy. The Corvani, bless their militaristic little hearts, were these big cat-like creatures who stood about 8 feet tall, had claws that could cut through titanium, and possessed enough natural arrogance to make a peacock feel insecure. Their entire culture revolved around honor, warfare, and the deeply held belief that everyone else in the galaxy was basically just waiting around for the privilege of being conquered by them. Their supreme military commander was General Vex Thari Bloodclaw, and yes, that was actually her name. Apparently, the Corvani weren't big on subtlety. She was this massive, intimidating specimen with fur the color of midnight and eyes that glowed like amber coals. The kind of being who could silence a room just by walking into it, assuming everyone in that room wasn't already too busy wetting themselves in terror. Now, General Bloodclaw had 2 cubs, and when I say cubs, I mean the alien equivalent of toddlers, complete with all the chaos, curiosity, and complete disregard for personal safety that implies. Their names were Riv and Kess. They were about 4 years old in Corvani years, and they had apparently inherited their mother's complete lack of fear combined with a child's unlimited capacity for getting into trouble. The humans, meanwhile, had sent in their usual response to this kind of situation, the Marines. Because apparently, when faced with 8-foot-tall alien warriors with natural weapons and a superiority complex, the human solution was to send in their angriest, most stubborn people and see what happened. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire with more fire, except sometimes it actually worked. The particular Marine in question was Staff Sergeant Jessica Chen, though everyone called her Jess. She was this compact, wiry woman who stood maybe 5'6" on a good day but somehow managed to project the kind of energy that made you think she could bench press a tank if she was sufficiently motivated. She had served 3 tours in the Outer Rim, survived 2 previous alien conflicts, and possessed the kind of tactical brilliance that came from being too stubborn to die and too smart to quit. The fateful encounter happened during what military historians would later call the Battle of Kepler, 442b, though honestly, calling it a battle was being generous. It was more like an elaborate game of capture the flag, except the flag was a mining station and both sides were really, really bad at sharing. Jess had been leading a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines when everything went sideways. Her team got separated during a plasma storm, her communications went down, and she found herself alone in hostile territory with nothing but her wits, her rifle, and an MRE that tasted suspiciously like cardboard soaked in regret. She'd been moving through what appeared to be an abandoned sector when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of something small and scared crying. Now, any sensible person would have kept walking. This was enemy territory, after all, and getting involved in whatever was making that noise seemed like a fantastic way to end up very dead very quickly. But Jess, bless her incredibly poor decision-making skills, had never been accused of being sensible. She followed the sound to what looked like the ruins of a bombed-out building. The crying was coming from inside, and it definitely didn't sound like any Corvani warrior she'd ever encountered. It sounded young. It sounded frightened, and it sounded like something that needed help. Against every ounce of military training and common sense she possessed, Jess Chen climbed through the rubble and went to investigate. What she found inside made her question whether she'd hit her head harder than she thought during the plasma storm. Two small, fluffy creatures were huddled in the corner, crying in what she could only assume was the Corvani language. They looked like someone had taken house cats, scaled them up to the size of human toddlers, given them opposable thumbs, and then dressed them in tiny military uniforms that were now torn and dirty. The cubs looked up at her with these enormous golden eyes, and Jess felt something in her chest do a little flip. They were terrified, clearly lost, and absolutely adorable in that way that makes even the most hardened soldier go all soft and stupid. Well, Jess muttered to herself, this is either the best thing that's happened to me today or the thing that's going to get me court-martialed. Possibly both. The cubs stared at her for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if this strange, small creature was going to eat them or help them. Jess slowly set down her rifle and raised her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Hey there, little guys," she said softly. "You lost?" One of the cubs, the slightly larger one, made a sound that was probably supposed to be threatening but came out more like a squeaky growl. The smaller one just continued crying. Jess reached into her pack and pulled out her emergency rations. She broke off a piece of the protein bar and held it out cautiously. The cubs watched her suspiciously for a moment before the smaller one's curiosity overcame its fear. It crept forward on unsteady legs and sniffed the offering. Apparently, human military rations passed the alien toddler taste test, because within minutes both cubs were eagerly accepting food from Jess's hands and making happy little chirping sounds. "Great," Jess said, watching them eat. "I've been adopted by enemy alien children. This is definitely going in my service record." The smart thing to do would have been to find a way to return them to the Corvani lines. The tactically sound thing would have been to use them as leverage. The thing that would have gotten her a commendation and possibly a promotion would have been to hand them over to intelligence for questioning. Instead, Jess Chen did the most human thing possible. She decided to take care of them. She found a relatively secure hiding spot in what used to be a communications bunker, set up a basic camp, and settled in to wait for either rescue or death, whichever came first. The cubs, apparently deciding that this strange alien was acceptable, curled up against her for warmth. What happened next was something that no amount of military training had prepared her for. The cubs, exhausted from whatever ordeal had separated them from their mother, fell asleep. And not just any sleep. They fell asleep curled up on her chest like oversized, purring cats. Jess found herself trapped under about 40 pounds of sleeping alien toddlers, unable to move without waking them. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, occasionally reaching down to pet their incredibly soft fur and wondering how her life had become so wonderfully weird. Meanwhile, back at Corvani Command, General Bloodclaw was having what could politely be called a complete meltdown. Her cubs had been in the care of a trusted aide when the bombing started. In the chaos of the evacuation, they had become separated. For the past 18 hours, the most feared military commander in 3 sectors had been tearing apart half the planet, looking for 2 small, fuzzy creatures who were probably hiding under a rock somewhere, crying for their mama. The Corvani military, bred for honor and warfare, had absolutely no idea how to handle their supreme commander having a maternal panic attack. They'd sent out search parties, called in favors from allied species, and were generally turning the entire war effort into the galaxy's most heavily armed search and rescue operation. This was the situation when Jess's backup finally arrived. A full Marine squad, led by Captain Rodriguez, found the bunker and prepared for a standard extraction operation. What they found instead was their missing staff sergeant fast asleep under a pile of alien cubs, all of them snoring softly. "Sergeant Chen," Captain Rodriguez whispered, trying very hard not to laugh. "What exactly is your situation here?" Jess opened one eye and glared at him. "I'm being held hostage, sir, by adorable alien children. Send help." The cubs, disturbed by the new voices, woke up and immediately decided that more humans meant more potential sources of food and attention. Within minutes, the entire Marine squad was sitting in a circle playing peekaboo with enemy aliens while their staff sergeant tried to explain how she'd accidentally become a babysitter. They were lost and scared, Jess said defensively. What was I supposed to do, leave them? Yes. Oh, Captain Rodriguez replied. You were supposed to leave them. They're enemy combatants. They're 4 years old. Enemy 4-year-olds. This argument might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of a Corvani search party. The Marines immediately went into defensive positions, weapons raised, ready for a fight. The Corvani warriors approached with equal caution, clearly expecting trouble. And then one of the cubs spotted the Corvani soldiers and made a sound that can only be described as pure joy. Both cubs scrambled over the Marines and ran toward the search party, calling what were obviously Corvani words for family members. The lead Corvani warrior, a massive specimen with scars covering half his face, caught the cubs and held them close. For a moment, the feared alien warrior looked exactly like what he was, a relieved uncle who had found his missing family. He looked up at the Marines, clearly struggling with the situation. Protocol demanded he treat them as enemies. Honor demanded he acknowledge what they had done. Practicality demanded he not start a firefight while holding 2 cubs. You protected them? He asked in heavily accented standard. Jess stepped forward. They were scared and alone. Anyone would have done the same. The Corvani warrior studied her for a long moment. Then he did something that no one expected. He bowed. It wasn't a deep bow, but it was respectful acknowledgement from a warrior to another warrior. I am Kexval Ironclaw, brother to General Bloodclaw. These are her cubs. She has been. He struggled for the words. Worried sick, Jess suggested. Yes, this phrase, worried sick. She will want to thank you. Captain Rodriguez was frantically trying to figure out how to spin this situation in his after-action report when his communication device crackled to life. It was command, and they did not sound happy. Rodriguez, what's your status? We're reading Corvani forces converging on your position. Sir, it's complicated. Complicated how? Rodriguez looked around at the scene, his Marines playing with alien cubs while their parents watched nervously. 2 species that had been trying to kill each other for 6 months, suddenly acting like they were at a very awkward playdate. Sir, I think we might need a diplomat. What happened next went down in military history as either the most successful hostage exchange ever conducted or the most ridiculous peace negotiation in galactic politics, depending on who was telling the story. General Bloodclaw arrived with half her army, fully prepared to level the entire area to get her cubs back. What she found instead was her children happily playing with enemy soldiers, while everyone tried very hard to pretend this was a normal military situation. The reunion between the general and her cubs was something that would have made even the most hardened war correspondents reach for tissues. The 8-foot-tall terror of 3 star systems sank to her knees and held her babies while they chattered excitedly about the nice humans who had shared food and played games. When she finally looked up at Jess, her eyes were still damp with tears that she was trying very hard to pretend weren't there. You are the one who protected my cubs? She asked in perfect standard. Yes, ma'am, Jess replied. They're good kids. General Bloodclaw studied the small human woman who had risked everything for 2 alien children she'd never met. According to everything she knew about humans, they were supposed to be weak, cowardly, and selfish. This one was clearly defective. My children speak highly of you, she said finally. They say you shared your food and kept them safe in the dark. Anyone would have done the same, Jess said again. No, General Bloodclaw replied firmly. Anyone would not. Honor recognizes honor, regardless of species. And then she did something that made the jaws of every Corvani warrior present drop to the ground. She offered Jess a formal bow of respect, warrior to warrior. The political implications of a Corvani general showing respect to a human marine sent shockwaves up both chains of command. Within hours, diplomats were scrambling to figure out how to handle a situation where the leaders of 2 warring species were bonding over childcare techniques. The cubs, blissfully unaware that they had accidentally ended a war, insisted on saying goodbye to each of the Marines individually. They gave Jess an especially long hug and made her promise to visit them. which she did despite having absolutely no idea how she was going to keep that promise. The peace talks that followed were unlike any diplomatic negotiation in recorded history. Instead of the usual sterile conference rooms and formal protocols, they took place in what could best be described as a playground. General Bloodclaw had insisted that her cubs be present, and the human diplomatic team had decided to bring Jess as a cultural consultant, which was military speak for the alien babies like her, and we have no idea how else to handle this. The negotiations proceeded smoothly, right up until one of the cubs decided that the human ambassador's briefcase looked like an excellent toy. Watching a career diplomat try to maintain his composure while a 4-year-old alien systematically destroyed his carefully organized documents was entertainment value that money couldn't buy. The final peace treaty, officially known as the Kepler Accords but unofficially called the Naptime Treaty, included several unprecedented clauses. There was a cultural exchange program, a joint research initiative, and a provision for shared childcare resources that had the lawyers on both sides scratching their heads. The signing ceremony was conducted with appropriate dignity and gravitas, right up until both cubs decided to help by adding their own paw prints to the documents. The footage of two enemy generals trying to maintain their serious expressions while alien toddlers climbed all over the peace treaty became the most viewed political video in galactic history. Jess received a commendation for exceptional service, a promotion to gunnery sergeant, and a standing invitation to visit the Corvani homeworld whenever she wanted. She also received a formal adoption into the Bloodclaw clan, making her an honorary aunt to two alien cubs who sent her care packages filled with their artwork and what she could only assume were Corvani cookies. The war officially ended when both sides realized that having a good relationship was probably better for everyone involved than trying to blow each other up. The Corvani got access to human medical technology, the humans got access to Corvani metallurgy, and everyone got to watch cute videos of interspecies friendship. 6 months later, Jess was back on Earth, teaching a cross-species relations course at the military academy and trying to explain to a room full of cadets how falling asleep under alien toddlers had ended up changing the course of galactic politics. The lesson here, she would tell them, isn't that you should adopt every alien child you find. The lesson is that sometimes the most powerful weapon in your arsenal is basic human decency. One of the cadets always asked the same question. But Gunny, what if they hadn't been friendly? What if they'd been hostile? Jess would smile and pull up a recent photo on her tablet, showing two rapidly growing Corvani cubs wearing marine t-shirts and giving thumbs up to the camera. Kid, she'd say, have you ever met a 4-year-old who stayed hostile after you gave them a cookie and a nap? The Corvani, meanwhile, had incorporated Chen's protocol into their military doctrine. It was a set of guidelines for interacting with enemy children that basically boiled down to don't be a monster, even during wartime. It was taught alongside traditional warrior codes and was considered just as important for maintaining honor. General Bloodclaw herself had become something of a celebrity in both species, known for her innovative approach to diplomacy and her willingness to let her cubs serve as unofficial ambassadors. She still commanded one of the most feared military forces in known space, but now she also hosted a weekly show about interspecies parenting that was wildly popular across 17 different planets. The cubs, now approaching their 5th birthday, had become fluent in both Standard and Corvani. They regularly video-called their Aunt Jess, showed off their latest achievements, and were already talking about visiting Earth to see where humans came from. When asked about their famous adventure, they would solemnly explain that Aunt Jess had shared her food when they were hungry and kept them safe when they were scared. To them, it wasn't a momentous historical event that had changed the course of interstellar relations. It was just what grown-ups were supposed to do for kids who needed help. And perhaps that's the most human thing of all. The inability to see a child in need without wanting to help, regardless of species, politics, or the potential for getting court-martialed. The official record states that the Corvani-Terran War ended due to changing political pressures and successful diplomatic intervention. The unofficial record, the one that gets told in marine bars and Corvani warrior lodges, tells a different story. It tells the story of how two lost cubs, one stubborn Marine, and the universal language of naptime, managed to accomplish what months of warfare couldn't, proving that maybe, just maybe, we're not so different after all. And if that's not worth raising a glass to, I don't know what island.